Conscious leaders put people first, but so do conscious companies. I spent 7 years of my life working at Skyrun Aspen, always joking that it was my public service subsidy. And they walk this. During COVID, Skyrun helped short-term rentals transition to long-term housing so locals had a place to stay and owners could keep their homes. And when the time was right, they helped us shift right back as a community. If you're looking for a vacation rental company that leads with care, then Skyrun is it. To experience their commitment to community and care in Colorado, use code HOP15, that's Healing Our Politics 15, for 15% off a stay. Whether for yourself or someone in your community, check the link in the show notes for more.
Hello, my name is Skippy Mesereau, coach, former elected official, and lifetime public servant. Welcome to Healing Our Politics, the show that shows you, the heart-centered public servant and political leader, how to heal our politics by starting with the human in the mirror. It is my job to sit down or stand up with the best experts in all areas of human development, thought leaders, coaches, therapists, authors, scientists, and more, to take the best of what they have learned and translate it specifically for the public service experience, providing you actionable, practical, tactical tools that you can test out today in your life and with your teams. I will also talk to leaders across the globe with a self-care practice, getting to know them at a deeply human and personal level so that you can learn from their challenges and journey. Warning, this is a post-partisan space. Yes, I have a bias. You have a bias. We all have a bias. Everybody gets a bias. And I will be stripping out all of the unconscious cues of bias from this space. No politics, partisanship, or policy here. Because well-being belongs to all of us. And we will all be better served if every human in leadership, regardless of party, ideology, race, or geography, are happier, healthier, and more connected. This show is about resourcing you, the human doing leadership, and trusting you to make up your own damn mind about what to do with it and what's best for your community. So, as always, with love, here we go. Hello and welcome to the Healing Our Politics podcast, the show that shows you, the heart-centered leader, how to heal our politics by starting with the human in the mirror. This episode, we have something different because the human in the mirror is in fact me. And though you can't see this on mic, I am literally staring by random chance into a mirror. And across from me is a mirror in other ways, my good friend and lead researcher on the Healing Our Politics podcast, Jesse Link. If you have enjoyed the deep diving conversations, the wide breadth of conversations we have had, then really it's Jesse that you should be thanking first and foremost. His just degree of detail and specificity and innate interest in each of our guests is what sets the standard and the table for every interview we do. And so today, as we turn the tables, I'm excited, a little bit nervous, and excited to be on the other side of the table from Jesse and being the recipient of his deep work. We will get into my upbringing, my family, my path to now complete with the stories of travel, defeats, addiction, and getting back up again. The systems and processes I use daily and the people who keep me whole. It's a deep dive into who I am, how I came to be, and I am honored, truly, to share it with you. But before I do, let me tell you a little bit more about Jesse. Jesse Link has one of those backgrounds that sounds impressive on paper. A college athlete who climbed the ladder at Goldman Sachs, only to realize he was leaning against the wrong wall. From there, he founded a venture-backed business, fell flat on his face, got back up, this time in Mexico. Wait, how did I get here? And kept going. I've come to know him as a man more interested in the crooked paths
the small alleyways, the ones hard fought through failure and creative discovery. There is simply more meaning there. And it was on this crooked path where our relationship began to take shape. And for that, I am forever grateful. These days, Jesse is a trusted strategic partner to agencies and growing businesses, helping CEOs connect the dots between their business and themselves, their numbers, their narratives, and their blind spots. He's also the lead researcher here at Healing Our Politics, and proudly, he says, a coaching client of mine turned lifelong friend, and his speech at my wedding recently certainly highlights that. I see you, brother. Behind the strategy and structure lives a self-proclaimed investigator, storyteller, and participant in the human experience with deep curiosity about what drives us, what blocks us, and how we find our way back to passion. Jesse is actively exploring creative pursuits expressed in writing, video, interviews, and documentaries as he travels around Central and South America. And maybe, just maybe, one day soon, he'll be brave enough to share them with you and the world. But for now, he's allowing his lack of knowledge to lead the way, shadowboxing with beginner's mind. And perhaps, dear listener, you should track him down before he is taken up. And with that, I invite you to kick back, relax, and enjoy this winding, wandering, yet tactical, because not all those who wander are lost, it has been said, conversation with Jesse and myself.
Skippy, thank you so much for this opportunity. I will add, just so the audience knows, I am also a client on the coaching side, and I do think that's quite important for this conversation because it's not just giving me a perspective into how you work with individuals in your professional setting, but a lot more of your personal story, which has quite resonated with me, that matches and mimics a lot of mine, and I think we'll get into a good bit of that today, but also has given me a plethora of questions that have been on my mind, frankly, since I met you 2.5+ years ago as we crossed paths on our independent entrepreneurial journeys. And so I want to start, frankly, by, well, not embarrassing you, but putting you in the seat so that the audience understands the background and the backdrop, even just starting professionally, of the last 15 years of your life leading to this point now, which is the description of yourself, right? So when we go to the beginning in the opening of this pod, you refer to yourself as a coach, elected city council member, to lifetime public servant. Now, that doesn't include ultramarathoner, doesn't include partner, it doesn't include entrepreneur, it doesn't include fundraiser, it doesn't include organizer, it doesn't include all of these other things that embody who you are. Fashionista, we'll get to that too. But, going all the way back to 2007 as a college kid, as a 21-year-old, you're running 5 different parts of Obama's campaign across Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin. You immediately at 23 years old, then go and run a campaign successfully for Jesse White in the state of Illinois, your home state. Then you gallivant across the world to tons of locations. This graduate school you had in foreign lands. You come back to your now home, Aspen, and really take off. Multiple businesses you've started, council chair here, council chair there, foundation here, foundation there, running all the way up through being elected as the youngest member of the City Council of Aspen in 2019 to where we are today over the last number of years of starting ELC and now HOP. But where I really want to start, though, is when people hear the beginning of this podcast and they hear you describe yourself, there is a clear difference between how you refer to yourself as a coach and a city council member, and then the energy you use when you call yourself a lifetime public servant. And so where I'd love to start is, one, what does being a public servant actually mean to you? And two, what does it mean for you to go through the world carrying yourself as someone who identifies as a lifetime public servant?
That's not actually very embarrassing. Maybe I'll challenge you to come back to that. One little, very minor bit of cleanup, which is just I was a college student in 2007. I then did go to work on first as an unpaid intern before those those roles that you mentioned on the Obama campaign, but it wasn't simultaneous. I don't think you were saying that, but just at the same time, I ended up graduating early from college, driving back home to Chicago, and then sort of starting that journey. So it was sequential. What does it mean to be a public servant? And why is the energy different? I think that's such an interesting thing that you picked up on that I hadn't even thought about. I think the reason the energy is different is I'm kind of uncomfortable with titles, and I always have been. Before I ever thought I would get involved in the political space, back when if you had asked me, I would have looked at you like you were crazy, although my grandma would have told you that already. I always had this deep grounding in belief in being of service to others, in leaving the world better than you found it, in exercising your energy, your most sacred, non-renewable resource in your time towards the betterment of others and the collective. It's not something that I ever, we were talking the other day about books when people like quote something from 15 years ago and you're like, all right, listen, Richard, bullshit, you know? And so I don't have like a memory of my grandfather sat me down on his knee and said, son, one day, like, I don't remember that. I just remember it being such an obvious thing in the environment. We both come from Jewish background, like that notion of tikkun olam, to repair the world. The school I went to had embedded within it a program called Keshet, which means rainbow in Hebrew, which was a special needs school. But some of the students had like truly debilitating, nonverbal in middle school type disabilities or other abilities. And I don't know, that just like, it just felt normal. I don't know how to say it other than that. So there's never been a question in my mind that my life would be dedicated towards the betterment of our world and the communities within it. But I never knew what that was going to look like. And politics is a place where, whether it's true or not, there's sort of this spoken and unspoken expectation that everyone's trying to climb the ladder to get the biggest title, to have the biggest role. And there's a duality with me. There's one part of me that does want to have a big role because I want to have a big impact. There's one part of me that is attracted to the idea of status and title, but the much larger part of me couldn't give a shit. And so I get really uncomfortable around titles. But public servant just feels like something that I'll always do. Never more than now.
There's a lot in there, and I want to immediately actually just double click on your grandmother, because my understanding is a lot of reasons for who you are is from her. The original reasons that brought you to Aspen is from her. And so I would be curious to how you believe she would be feeling about what you're doing today. Mm-hmm. Because in the world that we live in, and you just spoke to it about titles, right? As you know, I come from a very, a traditional corporate background and an entrepreneurial journey, and I'm working on myself in disassociating my own identity from titles. Mm-hmm. And in the political world we have today, many of the outsiders' views, and maybe the insiders' views as well, is that that title is actually more important than the service, or the reason somebody may get into the career is for it to be a career and not an act of service. And so I'd be curious to sort of drop back into that relationship with your grandmother and how you think she would be looking at all of the amazing things that you're doing here today.
Yeah, not just Miss Pearl, Miss Pearl, affectionately known, Baba, but also my grandfather, Arthur Upton. Both of them very much I hold in reverence. They really are my parental figures in so many ways. I think the younger me really lionized my grandfather, and the older me has come to deeply appreciate my grandmother in ways that I wish I could have earlier, and yet I have no guilt. Like I recall a couple years before she passed at 94, and this was during COVID, but not of COVID. And it was so sudden. I mean, she's 94, so you think, oh, well, that should be expected, but I mean, 36 hours before, she was playing bridge, going out with her friends to dinner, like tried to get a hold of her. She's like, I've got too many things on my calendar, call me later. And it just, I guess at that age, you get sick, and it literally was hours. So it was very unexpected. But the Thanksgiving prior to that, so that would have been, I guess, Thanksgiving 2020, we went, and at that point I had, done a few things that mirrored behaviors I had seen from her when I was younger. So I had a meditation practice, stuff like that. I just asked her, I was like, Baba, you've been meditating my entire life. Since I was an infant, why did you never suggest or encourage my mom or me to do this? And she just looked at me in her way so clearly and went, do you think you were ready? No, I guess not. So I don't feel bad about it. And I don't have the same spiritual beliefs that she did. She wasn't religious, although she was very Jewish and came from a Jewish family. She would have described herself as spiritual first. So I just hope she's right, because there's a part of me that, it's maybe 5% of my intellectual makeup, but I'm betting on that 5% that she is actually up there seeing this. And I hope she's correct for a lot of reasons, but mostly so she can see it, because I do think she'd be really proud. The thing I think she'd be most proud of, honestly, and this is a bit of maybe not where you were going, is my partnership. My first date with my partner, Jamie, was, I think, 20 days before she passed. So after our second date, that's when it happened, and I left town, and that whole year for me felt like such a passing of generations. It felt like the moving out of the liminal phase between the first and second third of life, from adolescence, for lack of a better term, into middle age. And that year was really that transition point for me at 33. I might be getting my math slightly wrong, people. But I think she'd be exceptionally proud of the partnership that I'm building and have built with Jamie. And it mirrors in so many ways the partnership that they had, which was kind of the one healthy relationship I got to see. And so that feels like amazing to me. And as far as the outer work, on one hand, she was always proud of me regardless of what I was doing. On the other hand, she never really got what I was doing. She's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, we're organizing this project. We're in a ballot initiative. We're running this campaign. I've got this nonprofit group. And she's like, cool. It's good. Great. I'm not sure how much that would have changed, although I'm hopeful that perhaps this podcast may honestly be something that she could have tangibly related to, because the programs were always on 24/7. Like, we're sleeping, we're awake, there's news in the background, and it was very up on current events, and not just politics, but all things. And so maybe this is something that she would have related to more directly. I don't know.
No, that's beautiful. As someone who is still fortunate for one of my grandmothers to be around, I resonate, one, with news always being on in the background, not always the news channel that maybe we'd prefer, but also the appreciation and just genuine love of following your path, right?
One sidebar that I just wanted to mention, you said something there. You said it wasn't always the news that we wished was on, and that resonated with me. And on this show, we're exceedingly careful not to bring in politics, partisanship into the container. And that's an intentional choice, because whether we are consciously aware of it or not, whether I'm consciously aware of it or not, despite my best efforts, I might hear somebody say something about some candidate or some policy that I have a strong reaction to. And even through my desire not to, it will close me off from their message. And we really want to be focused on the message that is applicable to all people. And before we started this, Jamie asked us to set intention, an inner and an outer intention. And my inner intention was precise, momentary honesty. My outer intention was to lead with vulnerability so that others can as well. And so even though this show is to steer clear from that, I want to respond to that and kind of show some of my cards as a means of giving context about where I am coming from, which is to say, the news channel in the home of my parents and grandparents changed a lot. It swung from MSNBC to Fox News, probably didn't get beyond those, let's call them traditional bookends, but we know that there are. And it changed both intermittently throughout the life intentionally, because people in my family were intentionally cultivating information that came from multiple sources, a practice that I've taken on. But it also came from pretty dramatic transformations in their belief structure over the course of my life. My grandparents were clear Reagan Republicans growing up. When I first went to work for Obama, that was like interestingly, despite having a lot of affection for John McCain, one of them came over and voted for Obama in that election. The other one didn't, but both were really proud of me for what I was doing. And by the next election, they were both voting for Obama. And by the end of my life, they had swung kind of far to the left. On the other hand, my father, who I would say was always growing up fairly independent, would always like honor voting for people from both parties, had swung very far into the Fox News echo chamber effectively, and not getting information from anywhere else. So I saw a lot of different things. My own journey has been one from starting out a pretty ignorant, frankly, fiery, I wouldn't say radical, but like very highly opinionated. Sure, I was right. I would never have used the word liberal, but I would have used the word progressive. Interestingly, at a time when progressive was not used, because I didn't want to be associated with liberal, and then progressive came in. And so to me, I always thought of progressive very much in the Theodore Roosevelt, and I still do, of which it was, which is someone who is oriented to change, which is on the other side of the conservative dynamic, but isn't tied to party. In fact, one of its biggest predispositions is to buck party and find new solutions and to be independent minded, if not independent. And so it's interesting. So I've had a journey, but what I've come to identify, and I believe this to be true, is that the parties, the labels, like it's so irrelevant compared to the system and the environment. That if we are not in a system that guarantees us a voice, that guarantees us speech, that guarantees us the right to disagree, if we don't have an environment that provides safety and continuity and all these things, the things we take for granted in life totally fall away. And I believe we're in a moment where the system both needs to be upgraded, but also safeguarded. And to me, any individual goals I have around policy or belief are so far subjugated to that as to be wildly unimportant. And it feels very cool to me to be in a place where I've kind of gone through those things. I've had these unique experiences where, back-to-back presidential conventions, I'm at a Democratic and a Republican convention, and not always for like the most honorable reasons. And yet I can step back from that and be in a place to see humans as humans, people as people, leaders as leaders, regardless of their title, regardless of their job. And that is, in my mind, an incredible service to the world. It's also an incredible service to me to be able to live and exist in that space. I mean, there's not a more effective therapy. And so it feels very, very aligned. I know that was a very long digression, and I apologize.
What I'd be really curious on to go into there is I also, as you know, am a child of divorce, and partnership is something that has eluded me in some ways. And when I look at your story and I look at who you are from when I've met you, I've only known you as being with Jamie. I'm curious on how that partnership has changed who you are, has given you more confidence in potentially who you are, has made you question things that you thought you were confident in leading up to that point, and how those things play a role in your vision of the world that you think we can build together as human beings in a post-partisan space or even a partisan space. I'd be curious on how you feel you've evolved.
For me, although there's a lot of things I do to care for my physical self, there's, one choice, one domino that is clearly the lead domino that everything else follows from, and that's physical activity. In terms of a communal life and a relational life, which as the most social higher primate that we know has ever existed seems pretty damn critical, partnership is that lead domino. I honestly don't believe there's a single decision that I or anyone listening will make in their lifetime that will be more consequential than the partner they choose, if they choose one. And I know that's not the path for everyone these days, but it's certainly the path for me, and it's always clearly been the path for me. And I just feel so incredibly lucky to have arrived in the partnership I am with Jamie. It's clearly the healthiest and best partnership that I've ever had. A big portion of that is due to who Jamie is and the journey that she's come from. We are similar in some ways, we're different in many ways, deeply complementary. But it's also true that had my 23-year-old self met Jamie, we wouldn't have this partnership. We wouldn't have any partnership. Like, I was simply not ready. I hadn't learned what I needed to learn to be there. And I think life is, as the old saying goes, like, luck is what you make it. And it's true. There's a randomness to the universe, but it's also the choices that you've made that allow you to best utilize that moment. And so I think timing had a lot to do with it. I met Jamie years before we started dating. So that in and of itself should be proof positive of that. And we will continue to cultivate partnership like the individual partnership. It's a verb. It's a practice. It's an effort. And on my worst days, I forget that and prioritize work or prioritize the podcast, prioritize the listener, prioritize my workouts over the partnership. But truly, everything comes from there. And so it is a new organism, and like having a child, it's almost its own organism that I look forward to a lifetime of nurturing and cultivating and serving and growing in predictable and unpredictable ways.
I love that you referred to the act of the relationship in its action state as a practice, right? Because it embodies the things that, well, we all need to know in sort of every part of our life, right? Everything is step by step. It's little by little. It's putting in the time and energy to try to get something as close to possibly perfect. I don't believe perfect exists, but
yes and no. It is and it isn't. All things in life are, and this is just my armchair theory. I think that human life, human evolution mirrors geologic evolution, that most change happens imperceptibly and slowly through the single drip of a water, right? That's how canyons are formed, but they're also not formed without tremendous earthquakes. And so I think like that, a relationship is the daily practice, but it's also these peak moments of transformation, whether that's your first meeting or the moment that you fell in love or a tragic accident or you come together or an impossible task that you decide to take on together. It's like the election that you go through that your partner supports you in, or the first marathon that you run together. Like, there are also those moments. And so I think it's just important to recognize both.
do you think those moments can be fabricated for the benefit of the partnership?
Fabricated has a particular connotation for me that I wouldn't buy into, but can they be cultivated? Totally. I think absolutely. Maybe not guaranteed, but like all things, you can set the table, do the preparation and pre-work in such a way that you cultivate the condition where the likelihood of that experience or outcome happening is significantly higher.
I like that, and I appreciate the nuance of it as well. I mean, I think with all these things, going back to the word practice, right, as sort of a baseline and foundation for the way we approach life, we had a good fortune of having someone to maybe a hero to you on the pod, David Allen, in getting things done. And one of the things that is quite clear to me about the work that you do and the work that you've done on yourself, most importantly, is that there is a selfishness in a good way of prioritizing what you need to be the best person you can be every day, to then go out into the world and work with leaders, to help leaders work with others. And embodying that word practice, I'd be curious in your own evolution, what has been the most rewarding part from practicing certain things that may have been quite difficult to you? And what has been the most surprising thing about what practice has given you? And I think that I'll overlay with that for listeners is I personally view Skippy as a extremely type A individual. You know, if you get his emails, it comes with a massive logo and image of a big lion at the bottom, which I think is quite emblematic of his personality in lots of ways. I think it's quite clear that you take great care in your discipline on the way you approach life. And I'd be curious what some of that evolution and what some of those sort of surprises and hardships have been along the way for you.
Disclaimer: if the word practice makes you want to throw up in your mouth a little bit, like I've been there, I was like, all right, do we really have to bring yoga class into everything? It's a practice. It's a practice. We're really talking about practice? Practice? A little AI reference. That's great. But to that point, I'm way more of, and I loved AI, but I'm more of a Michael Jordan fanatic, not just because I grew up in Chicago. I really do lionize and revere not just the exceptional talent, but the exceptional talent that shows up first, that comes in last, that gets the most out of every team member, that is a leader, not just a player. And that's always been the case for me, but increasingly so. So that's actually a really great interjection. Discipline has been just such an unlock key for me. And I've come to it through the challenges. I mean, when I was in fourth grade and was overweight, and as a result, was no longer permitted to play a lead position on my football team. We'd won the championship the year before. They basically said, hey, you're too fat. You play offensive guard now. And by virtue of that choice, you can no longer be the captain. And that's really fucking embarrassing. So I had my mom take me to Weight Watchers. And I mean, it took me until I was 23, I think, to really conquer that challenge of yo-yoing back and forth between upper end, but not elite end, athletic kid to overweight, gluttonous kid and embarrassed kid. But I did. I finally was able to find a balance, a set of approaches and systems that worked where I could enjoy the things that I love, because I fucking love food so much, as you have seen, since we're currently in Mexico where I'm eating everything. But I can do that with confidence that I'm going to be okay and I'm not going to revert to that kid, because I have, through experience, built systems, structures, protocols, tracking mechanisms that I know I'll get back to full health. And I'm actually staying very fit, even though I'm putting on a couple pounds right now. And so there's been just a number of those instances where I've hit a wall of some kind in behavior that was really unhealthy and not good for me. And it was often very hard, but I've been lucky that at each of those moments I've been able to, and not always immediately, but I've been able to find systems, support structures, programs, retreats that I've been able to first understand, identify, cultivate, and then habitualize new behaviors. And those very often come in the form of systems. So I would say there's just no chance I'd be in the place that I am today without those.
And in the theme of the show of trying to give thoughtful, actionable takeaways for individuals, if you were to have to sort of pinpoint some of the things that you did that made discipline a part of your day-to-day, that put you in a position mentally, emotionally, to actually believe in these structures and systems, like going back to that Skippy at 23 or 25 or 27 or whenever you really allowed these things to happen, what was that unlock? What was that change of mindset that gave you that confidence to be able to manage both?
I'll qualify by just saying I don't think there's one path to any of these things. And it's something I struggle with, especially as a coach, because it's so easy to proclaim this is, and then go sell a bunch of stuff. And it's like, this is bullshit. Everyone's different. And, it will work for some people. It won't work for others. So I will share what's worked for me with the recognition that I'm also pretty weird. And so I wouldn't expect necessarily what's worked for me to work for the majority of people, or even be the top 3 approaches that would work for people, but nonetheless has worked for me. If I go back and I think about major life-changing moments, the 2 things that have been the biggest initial inputs have been coercion and environmental change. I remember after that Weight Watchers meeting, walking into the school lunchroom, looking across all the foldable tables, and there's a vending machine in the back, and walking up to the vending machine to buy a pack of Doritos, staring. I could still see it, which is like a crazy thing, like such a normal memory to have it ingrained as if it's a car crash, but it was such a decision point for me. And I wanted them so bad. They look so good. My mouth is watering. Like I can literally just like feel my skin start to tingle at the thought of this chip. And I just said, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not. And I can't recall for how long that like full abstention of processed or junk food, and certainly those weren't the words I was using in fourth grade, but like stuff that I knew I shouldn't eat. But I just basically white knuckled it. Like, I won't do this. I've made a commitment. I have a reason for this commitment. I have a why behind this commitment, and it's bigger than just so I can look sexy in my Jankos, because trust me, A, no one looks sexy in Jankos, and B, I wasn't that sexy back then, which I guess makes it sound like I am now, but I'll leave that up to you. That was not the intended implication. But I just made a choice. The same thing was true when I decided to stop drinking alcohol for a year, when I decided, well, I didn't decide, when I was forced to decide that cocaine use could no longer be for me, when I decided to get back into the gym, when I lost 70 pounds, and when I decided to start running daily. Like, there's just a decision point that has been reached through hardship and accumulation of experiences that were unenjoyable over time, where I just make a choice. And from that, it's set in my head, and I'm just not doing it for a period of time. And then the second thing, as I said, is shifting environment. You know, if I'm used to housing a bag of chips at the end of football practice, once they're in the house, I'm fucked. They will get eaten. I can't do anything about it. It's involuntary. If I have been in a pattern of drinking a bottle or two of red wine every night to calm my nerves after a long ass work day and turn off my brain so I can go to sleep because I've yet to learn any techniques that would be more healthful, I can't have red wine in the house. I can't go to the bar with the team afterwards. I will be able to eventually, but not right away, not the day after making that decision. And so I have shifted my physical environment such that the enticements to the things that I know I don't want, whether those are behavioral, relational, or like ingestible, are just not present. And that has given me the space to be without the thing that I am getting the dopamine hit from, to reset. And then there's a time down the road where being in that environment is totally fine. It doesn't bother me after I've sort of broken that cycle. But those have been the two things that I think have been universal in shifting patterns.
And that's really interesting, because I think what's so important in my takeaway there is that going into these changes, ahead of actually making the change, there was already a sense of confidence that, one, you were going to be able to successfully make these changes, or at least the illusion that you'd be able to successfully make those changes, and two, that you'd be able to go back into those environments without maybe not concern or fear, but that you would get there.
It's true now. Like, I really think it is true now, which is a remarkable thing to say and fills me with pride, but it really wasn't true then. I just knew that I couldn't keep doing things the way I was doing them. If I wanted to be the person I wanted to be, if I wanted to have the experience I wanted to experience, if I wanted to just have the life that I sought or saw for myself, what I was doing wasn't going to work. And I had no confidence that it was or wasn't going to work. I didn't even think about that. I was like, I just need to do it. And frankly, for a long time, I would go in sort of ambivalent to the outcome, because I had, quote unquote, failed so many times. My weight had yo-yoed so many times. It took me 3 real times. And when I say 3 real times of trying to get sober from cocaine, I mean 3 like, okay, this is the last time ever. Or I don't mean like the day you wake up and you're like, not again, because then there's like 6,000. I mean, not really, but there's a lot. But I mean like the real, like, this is what I'm doing. And I failed at a lot of those. And when I got back in, it sort of didn't matter, because I was back at that place of this cannot stand. And so it was just a sense of requirement. Now, I will say, having had the experience of pretty dramatically shifting my daily cadence, my life, my fitness, my physical ability, my relationship to some of the most addictive substances in the world. Having done that so many times, at this point, I'm like, yeah, I can do anything. Doesn't mean it's gonna be easy or fun. At this point, I really do feel that confidence. But it took, I mean, if you count back from the first time, it took probably 20 years to get to that point.
And is there a moment in time where you close your eyes and you see of a before and after, a Skippy before this moment, a Skippy after this moment, and the clarity and the confidence to be able to go after those struggles, knowing they'll be hard, but having the confidence to take them on? Was there a moment in time that you think about?
There's definitely not a Skippy before and after. I think if I were to expand the timeline of my life on a chronological scale and choose any particular two, I could give you distinct differences between those two that had been selected, but there's not a clear BC, BCE delineator or AD. I don't know if there's Jewish folks listening. We have a whole different thing for this. It's really very silly. Yeah, there's no like pre and post Cambrian era that I could divide my life into. But I think there are distinctions between any 2 points within that scale. Now, to the point of having the confidence of, yes, I can overcome or do whatever I want if I truly want to. By the way, there might be things I kind of want to do that I'm not going to get to because I don't want to bad enough. But if I really am there, I would say that emerged probably following my first complete year of alcohol abstention. And it had been growing. Like my confidence had been growing over time. But I think after that, I really felt like, yeah, no, I got this.
I'd be curious actually how you compare that confidence, that confidence of I've got this in your 30s or in your late 20s to the confidence of a 21 or 22-year-old, right? Because you're a really interesting storyline for lots of reasons, but most people don't really go from sort of rising young star on the national level to rising star on the state level to actually, this is toxic, I'm done with this, I'm going to come away from it and have no intention to coming back, to rising star on a local level. And the confidence, or maybe ignorance, arrogance, whatever it could have been as a 21-year-old, 22-year-old, is a different type of confidence. And I'd be curious how you view yourself today versus that person. But also I'd love to sort of take us back to, going to 22-year-old Skippy and sort of move through a timeline a little bit of how you've evolved with that sort of clarity of confidence or clarity of self in each of these stages of your life.
With the benefit of hindsight, I think the confidence that I purported to demonstrate or feel in my 20s was a deeply false confidence. It was a show put on to mask some deep insecurity, to make myself look good at the expense of others, to puff myself up by pushing others down. And those weren't conscious choices. That's not what was going on in my head. I didn't really know it or understand it at the time. But that early part of me that was so in deep conviction about so many things, whether it was the existence of God or foreign policy. I'm like, the fuck do I know about foreign policy? I'm a 21-year-old kid, who hasn't seen a foreign land outside of a resort beach. I mean, that's not exactly true, but close enough. And so it really is like, I need to assert my identity and force my identity into the world so that I am accepted and welcomed. And to do that, I'm going to act really tough. I'm going to act really aggressive. I'm going to act very self-assured. I'm going to dress very, whatever. I'm going to pop my collar to tell you how great I am. And it was absolute bullshit. And on the inside, I was deeply insecure. I was deeply fearful of not fitting in with anyone, of not being welcomed in, of so many. I mean, I thought I was going to die before 30 until I turned 30. I was sure of it, and I couldn't tell you why. So I think that there may be some people who would have seen me and thought that I exuded confidence, But I certainly would not, in retrospect, describe my behavior or my state of being as confidence. And I think that most people who would see me as confident, with my kind of coach's hat on, my experiential hat on of having shifted myself and now what I look for in others, I think at that time I would have been much more susceptible to seeing a big, exaggerated showman type character, berating and pointing and yelling as a strong leader. And now I've come to realize that that is actually a front for someone who, in most cases, is probably still living out of their insecurities and their trauma. I would view not integrated enough to really have the wide view and meet people where they are and do the real work of leadership, which is bringing people together, lifting each other up, being excited by the success of others, wanting to be wrong if that's what it means for the collective to win. I was not capable of seeing that at that time because I hadn't done my own work, if that makes sense. And then I'm also aware that I'm more aware of my lack of confidence now. I have it in some areas where I've stood the test of time and I have experiential observations to draw on and that. But I mean, just on the walk here to this interview, I was in such an anxious state. I was so in my head about, I literally caught myself doing this. I'm like walking here and thinking about, what energy do I want to be on the microphone? Do I want to be like the excited Skippy who's really happy to be here? Do I want to be in one of those zones where like everything's funny and we're joking? Do I want to be serious? And then I was like, what are you doing right now? What are you doing right now? Like, this isn't how we show up anymore. But that comes from an insecurity of you seeing me as I am is not going to be good enough. And it's my job to control how you see me or control how you receive me such that I will be safe and accepted and successful. And of course, that's an illusion. Because as long as anything that, one, you're likely to not be safe, successful, or whatever. But even if you are, you're not really, because you're not actually being seen. It's just an illusion of you. And so the anxiety persists, the insecurity persists, and then you need to continue to reach higher and higher into the external validation while continuing to feel empty on the inside. And the only way to truly feel whole and confident is to actually put yourself out there as you are and recognize it's not going to be for everybody. But for those it is, the relationships will be real. There'll be actual connection. There'll be actual trust. There'll be actual joy. There'll be actual sorrow. There'll be actual all of it. And so I had to catch myself in that moment and bring myself back and do this beautiful opening practice with my partner to help set the stage for that. And luckily have a really great interviewer to help me stay in that place. So I'm much more aware of my insecurities now, which ironically gives me more confidence, but certainly not in all instances. And because I have had the experience of such change over time, I'm also aware that there will be significant change to come and that my future self will not be the same as my current self. I hope that self becomes more confident, more self-assured, more as a result giving, open, empathetic, all of those things. So I hope that my 40 or 50-year-old self is doing an episode with you on this podcast, looking back and retrospectively looking at how unknowingly insecure I was at this moment and how much I have shifted through the application of effort and work. And I hope that persists into my 80s and 90s and onward.
I really appreciate all the depth and the honesty there, because it's really easy to see somebody like you who's constantly doing. And it's not just constantly doing for doing's sake. It's doing in a way that is at a high intensity, a high output, a high caliber, and it looks easy, right? And doing looks easy. And I think what I've come to learn, what about in my own journey, but also in getting to know you more, is that doing is never easy. The other thing that I've come to learn about you is just an unrelenting amount of hope. And you just use that sort of word of hope for yourself. But that word hope also seems to guide you in everything we're doing here. Your hope for common ground, your hope for evolution of the environment, but your hope in human beings. And I'd love to take this opportunity as a transition to talk a little bit about your hope in people, the way you show up as a coach and in elected leaders collective, and the way that you try to spread hope, because you do it in a way that I've never experienced with anybody else in my life. And it comes from such a genuine place. And I'd love for our listeners to be able to get a piece of that, an understanding of where that hope comes from and how you approach sharing it and spreading it.
That's a super nice reflection, and I really appreciate that. It's interesting. Sharing hope is probably not, in all of my years of insane planning and visioning and blah, 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 everything I've written down to orient my life around and build practices around are two words I've never put together. It's never been part of it. So if it feels organic, it's because it is. It's an emergent property of the other things that I'm doing. So it's cool to hear that that's the case, and it's a really beautiful reflection. So thank you. It makes me feel really good. I really genuinely think of myself as a highly rational optimist. I'm certainly an optimist, but I think that's based on an evidentiary, oh gosh, editor, help me out here, evidentiary data set of the human condition. If we put ourselves behind the veil of ignorance, right, which is you're born at random to unknown parents in an unknown culture and an unknown religion and an unknown part of the world with unknown resources or wealth or whatever, you can pretty much track a straight line back to the Horn of Africa of pick any spot on that timeline. And the closer that spot is to modern day, the better your outcomes are going to be. The less likely you're going to die of infant mortality, the less likely you're going to have to be forced to kill or be killed in a war, the more likely you're going to be to follow your passion. And like, I love that. But like, this is something that we've come up with in the last couple years. The universe is 14.3 billion years old. The Earth is 4.6 billion years old. The human experience and our general cognitive is like 6 million years old. If you're to plot this on a calendar year, all of written history is in the last hour of the last day. The follow your passion is like in the last second. Like, we are so lucky to be alive at this moment. Even if you're a person who's born into, and there are still people living in absolute agony, but the likelihood on average of that is so infinitesimal compared to even 3 generations of humans ago. And the arc of that progress continues to grow and accelerate. Now, that doesn't mean you're not creating other challenges along the way. That's why we have this podcast. We did such a good job of making sure our physical environment was safe that we unintentionally crippled our social environment and our mental environment. And now we're in the midst of a mental health problem. But that's a high-class problem, people, because we're not dying at 22 from, a random cut on my finger that I got an infection of, or because I got stabbed to death by the neighboring tribe, which was what was going to happen to you most likely in human history. So I just think if we look back, we recognize that there's something biologically coded in us that makes us desire better outcomes for our children, better outcomes for society. The fact that there are you get on your device right now and say what you want about social media, and we can say plenty of things, that there are millions of people crying and effectively prostrating to shift foreign conflicts of places they've never been to and never will go to, just for the benefit of people on the other side of the world, should tell you something about the human spirit. And so I have had the great fortune and absolute privilege to go to a lot of places that had I not been to or hadn't sought information of, I would think of as very other and different, dangerous places that hate us, hate Americans. It's not true. It's just not true. Humans across the globe follow a number of very similar desires. Most people aren't plugged into the political landscape. They're not in the army, guys. They just want their kids to have a better future. They want to have a good and fulfilling life. And that's true universally. It's in the human spirit. And so I think when we aggregate that, even through the trauma and the warfare and all the things that are also part of the human experience that are destructive, and on average, we can see net that the good side wins and we keep getting better and better. And so it's not just hope, it's a belief that what has always been will continue to be, and a sense of responsibility knowing that to contribute to it.
I think the way that you just answered that and the way you communicate is a reflection of, well, one, the energy, but the way that you share hope. Because at not one point during that response were you at all sort of truly bogged down in the day-to-day. And for the work that public servants have to do, they have to be bogged down in the day-to-day. That is, frankly, their responsibility. And so as you think about your life and your time in public service and as a city council member and on all these organizations, how have you kept those two truths whole at the same time? That I need to deal with the realities of the day-to-day, that it's hard, it's frustrating, it's painful, it's slow, it's etc. But also, I'm so lucky to be here. Like, this is such a gift. I think I know I struggle holding those truths together at the same time, and I'm sure a lot of other people do too.
I'll give two answers to that I think are mutually true, concurrently true even. One's more of a theoretical, which is I question that assumption that you have to be bogged down in the day-to-day to be a leader. Yes, you have to deal with what is coming up day to day, but I think bogged down is a choice. We can go back to the famous Eisenhower quadrants, right? The immediate and the necessary. And I think leadership done well is where we spend enough time in the Lincoln way of sharpening the axe, right? For the first, 4 hours before you cut down the tree, of getting very clear on why we're there, what we want to do, what our priorities are, and then going through a decision-making process such that you recognize the things that are most important to you or that you are most adapted to uniquely as a leader are going to be far from all the things that need to be done. And so I think leadership done well is getting very clear about what we think of in coaching as the service zone of genius, right? What am I great at? What do I really enjoy? And what does my community need? And then like the Venn diagram overlap of those three parts is your service zone of genius. Now, my service zone of genius may include 3 policy areas, but there's like 10 that I really care about and 20 that need to get done, right? But it is about getting very clear on the unique application of your time for the utmost benefit. And then how can you empower and support and show off those around you to work on the other 7 things that you really care about so that you know that they're getting done, but you're actually team building in the process. And then recognizing that there should be a administration, a system around you for the other 10, and that you can still show up, and you have to show up in many cases and vote on those things, et cetera. So there's some degree of that, but you've cultivated a system in which you're not responsible for 20. Because if you are responsible for everything, you're responsible for nothing, and you're just not going to do it well. And so I push back on the assumption that you need to be bogged down in that. Now, what I will reflect as true is I have been bogged down. I sure have. And that's part of how I got to creating some of those systems, is because I did do everything. Why? Because I was insecure. Because I thought I had to say yes to everyone. Because I thought it was my job to solve every problem. And it's not. That's not what leadership's about. Those were patterned responses. And it took time for me to get past that. The example you gave earlier about email. For the first couple years in my term, the fact that I didn't get hit by a school bus is largely down to the fact that I live in a small town with careful drivers, because I crossed every street looking directly down at my phone, answering emails, because I thought I had to answer them 24/7, because my value as a leader was defined by whether I responded to you in 13 seconds or not. And it's just bullshit. Later on, with some greater clarity and assurance, I went, oh, right. what does the science say about this? Well, the science says that if I'm doing a task and then I check my email, that I don't get back to full acuity on that test for 17 minutes. That if I'm in a meeting and I'm looking at my phone, at best I'm giving a portion of my cognitive ability to the actual task in the room. And so what I'm actually doing is, putting lead ankle weights and then going for a race. And I'm wrapping that up in a bow that says I'm a great servant, and it's not true. And so from that place of understanding and that clarity of purpose, then I can create systems of saying, hey, I'm only going to check my email 3 times a day or once a day. But I'm going to be proactive in my communication so that everyone who gets that email, A, knows why I'm doing it, why it benefits them, why it benefits the service, not me, but the service. And it does benefit me because my experience is better, but gives them a lifeline of, if this is an emergency, call me, right? Like, so I was able to find in that instance and many others symptoms to unbog myself, but it came from being bogged in a place. Now, you didn't explicitly ask this, but the thing that I don't think that I effectively solved for, that I work with clients a lot on now, is it's not the emotional bogging, because there's plenty of tools and techniques and ways to get out of, I reduce my days of anxiety and stress while in office by huge amounts. I experienced call it like a happiness parachute on my connection to community in office. Parachute as in like your speed training, like you're running and it's slowing you down. The like unadulterated joy and glee and connection and pride that I have for my city prior to office and has returned after didn't disappear during, but was diminished. Like the parachute was behind me. It was much harder to find that connection to the awesomeness of my town. And that's because all day, every day, from the grocery store to the sidewalk to the running trail, all people are doing are stopping you and either telling you how bad of a job you're doing or what's wrong. And through no fault of their own, you're the person that's been elected to improve those conditions. And it's wonderful to have community members who feel open and able to share with you the source information you need to work on that. And it's hard to not have that. Was hard for me to have that not drag down my experience. It was the thing that I noticed most after I left office was I'd go out on a trail run, which is one of my favorite things to do. And someone would stop me, at a junction, and I'd be ready. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to answer this question. What are they going to say? What do we do this time? And then they'd just be like, isn't it the most beautiful day? And I'd be like, oh my God, it is the most beautiful day. Look at this, is incredible. How lucky are we? And we'd be like, yes, we're so lucky. And then we keep running. I'm like tingling as I say it. I didn't have that for years. That's the piece that I was not able to solve for in office. And I think in many ways is a huge part of what I hope emerges from this podcast and the newsletter community we're building off of it, and the growing family of leaders that have been through Elected Leaders Collective programming and coaching, is if you're not getting it from your community directly, you are getting it from one another, and being able to cultivate places of authentic and honest, but also positive sharing. And this is an idea that literally just came to me. We haven't done it, but as we do monthly free workshops for newsletter subscribers to this podcast, maybe once a quarter, it's like brag on your city day. And you get to remember what's awesome about it and why you're there representing it. That was the biggest unsolved bog for me.
And I appreciate both the pushback on the question, but also the truth and honesty, because I think that's some of the most important parts of all of this, that authenticity, that honesty, that understanding that there is going to be ups and downs, but the reason for doing it all is still worth it in the end through that. Partly because of that and what you have to do as an individual to get yourself out of that bog, out of whatever it may be that's holding you back, to be your true self and fulfill the things you're trying to do. I want to spend just one moment on your time in office. There's no secrets here, right? You ran for re-election. You lost to 2 other members of the community, but you're still, as much as some newspapers may have been excited about you leaving, you're still very clearly an unbelievably beloved figure in that community. I had the privilege of seeing it last fall when I came out to stay with you, and You weren't the mayor, but it sure felt like it at times. I would love to, one, just sort of hear your side of that experience, something that I imagine was quite painful for you, but then also still holding such an unbelievably profound love for your community in Aspen, your involvement in the community and all the different organizations, whether the Aspen Institute, et cetera, et cetera. You're still an active figure that holds your place as a citizen, as it's promptly tattooed beautifully on the inside of your form as a reminder. You hold that card really well now. And I would love to, one, just hear the emotional side, but also how you work through that to still see that your job as a public servant wasn't done even out of office.
You know, my first 4 years in office, the first 2 years were really triage in so many ways, either triaging the immediate request that I had, or COVID, or the decline of local businesses as a result, or housing security for folks. So both real and self-imposed, but also feeling under-resourced in the coaching vernacular. And then there was a pretty stark inflection point where I shifted my approach to leadership and really took responsibility for my own shortcomings and failures and began to apply the things that I had previously known or learned, but also the things that I was emergently learning in my own self-development process during those first 2 years of COVID and of isolation. And it was just a very different experience of really getting a lot done and building partnerships and shifting from, that proverbial tiger approach to lion approach. And as I was approaching re-election, my belief, my observations were that despite having had a string of really meaningful legislative victories that in many cases had not been of a similar magnitude since the 70s, being someone who's particularly gifted, if I'm being honest, of looking 20 years down the road and seeing the waterfall sequence of events and how things stack up, and having had 10 years of evidence of what I was saying 10 years prior and then being pretty much exactly there, I viewed us as being really behind the curve, doing a lot, but not doing nearly enough to meet the needs that we shared as a community and as an elected body. My observation was that in our heart of hearts, we all really wanted the same things, but it was the fear of, or the story that there would be political reprisal, backlash, pushback that kept us from doing the things that we needed to do. And so we continued to do a 20% version of them, which in some ways was the same as doing zero. I mean, it's not, of course, because there are people that have homes that, that they wouldn't have, and they're there. But in the long term, going 10 years out, the degradation of community was going to persist and continue. And even if some of those individuals or businesses maintained a little bit longer, there was an end to the road. And so I just made a very conscious choice early on that my reelection, while it could have been who knows, right? But in my mind at the time, I thought, well, it could be an easy reelection of say nothing, get reelected, stay in the seat, which is the safest thing to do, that I was not going to do that, that I was going to choose. And I said this live at debates. My number one priority in the election was to move the conversation. And my second goal was to win, because I felt like I was uniquely able in that role to have that platform and do those things. And so I oriented the campaign around some really outside of the box policy prescriptions for some agreed upon challenges. And I knew that anything that outside the box was not going to be fully understood or fully accepted. I hoped that by being very explicit with those, that if I won, the remainder of the political body and my fellow electeds would have the backing of the people to do the things that maybe they were unsure about, and understandably so. And it ended up being very close, but that's not what happened. And so I went through the dance afterwards of, as I do, like really questioning my assumptions, questioning my theory of the race, questioning myself. Was that something real and authentic? Or was I pre-butting an excuse to lose? Was that truly the most selfless thing to do, to like sacrifice my potential reelection to move the community forward? Or was it actually a kamikaze mission where the actual selfless thing would have been to like subjugate myself just enough to win and move forward to some degree? And it took me a number of months of really thinking and unpacking that and doubting my past self and where I was. But I think at the end of the day, I'm really proud of what we did. You know, it was actually a conversation that I had with, gosh, oh, I can't remember the name, but it was at the PS23 conference. They were on stage talking about the ballot initiative that my buddy Kevin Matthews ran to decriminalize natural medicines for mental health issues in Denver, which at the time was like an unimaginably possible thing. The conversation was between Roland Griffiths, who is no longer with us, who's one of the most legendary researchers in the field of mental health and natural medicines, and the other gentleman whose name is eluding me right now, who was also, I believe, at Johns Hopkins and leading researcher putting things together. And very unexpectedly, he mentioned on stage that there was a period early in that campaign where he, as someone who really wanted this to succeed, but had reservations about how, you know, stringent or lax the rules ended up being, was looking at and following the campaign and saw on the website of the campaign, and I'm sorry if I'm not getting this exactly right, folks, I'm paraphrasing from some time ago, but saw some language that he viewed as hyperbolic with his researchers hat on, that they were making exaggerated claims for the idea of campaigning, like, we're going to solve the mental health crisis, right? And it's like, I don't know what was on the website, but it was something that he, as a very buttoned down researcher, said, like, I don't think you can make that claim in a peer reviewed journal. He called Kevin. Kevin didn't know him and said, hey, I appreciate you're doing this and trying to run it. How you run your campaign is up to you. But I believe for the community and the long-term viability of these changes, for ultimately the healing of many people and saving many lives, I think you need to tone it down and live within the scope of what's real and verifiable. And just kind of hung up the phone. And he said, to his surprise, Kevin, a number of days later, changed the language for the campaign. And when he asked him why, it was like, well, if we're going to win, we need to win on the truth. We need to win on the merits. And then what he said, which is how he described it, is it is not the job of the leader to determine the speed of the car. It's the job of the leader to determine where the car is going. And the public, through the course of elections, gets to decide to hit the gas or the brake. And it just really resonated with me. And I thought, yeah, you know what? I was really showing up as a leader who said, I believe as a community, this is where we need to go. And the community hit the brake. And I just have to be okay with that. If you say this in coaching all the time, you know, you fight reality, you lose 100% of the time. And so I really feel like I did do what the best that I could as a leader. And also it's just opened up a door to a totally new chapter of my life that I am enthralled about, that I just adore, that I'm so lucky to be in service in this way on the podcast, but also as a coach where I'm not only getting to have tremendous impact in my community, but on communities literally ocean to ocean. And selfishly, in a place where we are focused on the positive and we are in a selection bias of characters who have opted into radical responsibility and doing the inner work. And so my experiential day-to-day is significantly improved. That doesn't mean there's not a time or place, or maybe a time or place in the future for me to go back to that other phase. Hopefully better resourced, better able. But you know, it's really worked out for me personally, I suppose.
When I think about, you know, some of the research I was doing, it you know, ahead of this, it gave me sort of my first look into what that period of time could have been like for you, all of the YouTube videos and sort of a daily and weekly basis that you put up there that are wonderful, but then also, the myriad of Aspen Daily News and articles that have numerous positions in numerous word choices. But the one thing that I thought was really interesting in that car analogy was, in reflection on your side that you vocalized, was the pace of progress. And I don't think what you just said means that you've come to a point where you disagree with actually what you were saying then, that there was a lot to be done. We could have been doing quicker or faster or whatever it may be, but that the responsibility and the role is to move forward based upon what people around you, the community, wants, and use the resources that you have. You can't take them out of thin air. And so I think that idea of, even when you want to move fast, you still have to be patient. And it goes back to, frankly, a lot of the self-work that you've done, a lot of the work that you do in coaching, this idea of step by step. As you know, like I've recently gotten a little bit into mountaineering, and there's a word in Swahili that a lot of the mountaineer guides use called pole, which is just sort of take it easy, mate, like step by step. And when I think about my relationship to people in public service, I have a number of other friends, I went to Brandeis, and so a lot of that community ended up in sort of nonprofit public service world. It is constantly a race forward. We're not doing enough fast enough. Time is working against us. And I really appreciate sort of your reflection there of that. Sure, we may want to go faster, but we have to deal with the cards that have been dealt, and we can use our knowledge, and frankly, we can work on ourselves to move the needle forward the best way we know how, but there's still going to be limitations. And understanding that and accepting that is an unbelievably powerful part about every part of life that I think is really interesting.
And now, a quick break from our sponsors, and we'll be right back to the show.
Leadership is about making tough calls under pressure. The key is knowing who to trust. When Aspen faced short-term rental and zoning challenges, I turned to Skyrun Vacation Rentals in Aspen. They gave it to me straight and trusted me to do what was best for our community. With their help, we crafted balanced regulations that strengthened our economy, supported locals, and preserved our character. If you need expert guidance in a time of STR or zoning challenge, give them a call. And to experience their commitment to community and care in Colorado, don't take it from me. Use code HOP15, that's Healing Our Politics 15, for 15% off a stay, whether for yourself or someone in your community. There's a link in the show notes. Feel free to pass it along. The Healing Our Politics podcast is brought to you by the Elected Leaders Collective, the first, leading, and most highly recognized name in mental health, well-being, and performance coaching for elected leaders and public servants, designed specifically for you. Now, don't be fooled by the name. The Elected Leaders Collective is not just for elected leaders. It is for all public servants, staffers, volunteers, government, nonprofit, whole organizations. This is for you. If you are filled with passion for improving your community and world, but are tired, as I am, of the anger, stress, and vitriol, if you find yourself banging your head against that same wall, struggling with the incoming criticism and threats, arguing with colleagues who are supposed to be on your team, and questioning if it's even worth it anymore, then the Elected Leaders Collective programming is specifically for you. With the Elected Leaders Collective, you will learn to become a hashtag political healer, building the authentic, unshakable confidence and courage to stay true to yourself through the anger and pressure, while cultivating the open, empathetic mind to meet others with the curiosity, compassion, and kindness necessary to respond to threats, improve challenging relationships, de-escalate conflict, and bring people in your community together to solve real problems and get shit done. You'll reduce stress, anxiety, and overwhelm, and become a more effective leader while having time for your family, yourself, your health, and your wealth, sleeping well at night, and showing others they can too. Now that's leadership. Healing Our Politics listeners receive 10% off all Elected Leaders Collective services using the code hashtag
political healer. Use it today and become one of the brave political leaders healing our politics. Use code #politicalhealer by going to www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today. That's www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today.
There are failures, there are setbacks that we've discussed here, but for the most part, I imagine you've probably been extremely successful in almost everything you've done. You may not agree with that, but from the outlookers looking in, right, in the context of the 8 point whatever billion people in the world, you've knocked it home.
It is true that one of my patterns or pathologies is I tend to perform fairly highly on a bell curve, a couple standard deviations over, and yet always compare myself to the people truly at the top. So, for example, as a skier in college, I was captain of the free ride team at Boulder, University of Colorado, which is, arguably the place where the most skiers would go. I was able to, win a ski cross collegiate national championship. At that time, I don't think it was ever D1 ski cross racing, but it was the highest level that was available in college. I was unquestionably a good skier. I hung out with the best skiers in the school. And yet, my three closest friends were like sponsored X Games athletes. And I could never shake the thought of like, I'm really not very good at this. And so my selection bias of that is real. So I appreciate your reflection. But what I also wanted to share in that is my privilege. Also through no fault of my own, being born on third base. And I applied the same comparison growing up where like I grew up in a relative to anywhere in the world, very wealthy family with great privilege and great schools. And, I got to go, I'm totally one of those kids who went from basketball practice to football practice to whatever. I got that upbringing, which is an incredible privilege. And I would always look at the rich kid in school who had 30 times the wealth of my family and think like, oh, I'm not really a rich kid. But actually I was. And so I just want to point out my privilege of, yes, I've been successful in many areas, even though I haven't always agreed with that assumption, but I also got the resourcing in terms of education and parenting and so many things that put me in a position where that got to be the default, which is not the case for most people. So I just want to own that.
I grew up in the Northeast, but sort of a similar basis to where you grew up in North Chicago. And the thing that I still say today is I grew up in one of the poorest households, one of the wealthiest towns in America. And so my perspective on what family life looks like, what life looks like was so flawed, but also so privileged at the same time.
I just wanted to ask you, like, where that comes from for you. Because for me, it came from a place of, like, the fact that I would say something like that, like, which was not the case for me. It wasn't that we were the poorest family in the richest place, but, like, similar thing of comparison to diminish the privilege or wealth that I had just came from a place of guilt and shame. Just really having a lot of shame and guilt for having been brought up in a wealthy environment. Because it didn't feel like I earned it. It didn't feel like any of that. And I wanted to be able to captain my own ship, whatever that meant. And it's odd because I've been able to really take advantage of, and I think you should, like, if that's given to you, what better thing to do than to use it to serve others? And just mental gymnastics for me of like really, and I'm still working on this, overcoming the guilt and shame around it. And I wonder if that's similar to you or why you use that phrase.
Well, first, it's definitely quite hyperbolic, a little exaggerated. Yeah. Like, Mom, Dad, if you're listening, maybe you will. I'll share it with you. We certainly weren't the poorest, but it was a New York City suburb. My path to Goldman Sachs it started at a table at 11 years old when my dad said you should work there, right? Because that's what the wealthiest people in town's fathers did. The flip side of that for me, it was less guilt and shame, actually, because the rest of my social experience was travel, competitive baseball, where actually the majority of the parents were well off enough to be able to afford for their kids to travel across country for sports, but were nowhere near what my town was. And so for me, similar to actually how you mentioned earlier in the conversation on fitting in, was I just didn't in either place. And I had no perspective actually from an insider's, what the kitchen table conversation was like in either of those environments. Mine was quite noisy and loud and ruckus. But yeah, so there's, for me, it was not guilt and shame. It was actually just my way of trying to create relatability to others, and extend that olive branch of, hey, you see me because of the town that I'm coming from as XYZ. Let me try to at least push back on your initial assumptions, which was most of the time me putting assumptions on myself.
I think it's interesting that you say me trying to fit in, because I would never have couched it in those terms. But ultimately, I do have a belief structure, and I'll just own this, that there's something wrong with wealth. Like, I could go into all kinds of details of how I arrived there. I'm not sure it's relevant to the conversation. And yet, there's a huge part of me that wants to have it, that has benefited from the upside of it, that adores the things that financial ability provide, including this expensive microphone I'm talking into in Mexico that I flew to, and the Airbnb that I paid for it, and the croissant that I'm eating that was, it's such an obvious dichotomy that lives within my own head. And that's my work to do, to free myself from that. But at some level, it was the belief that other people believe what I did as a kid, that there's something untoward or ugly about wealthy people, that made me feel ashamed or guilty. Because shame is not something you can feel in isolation, right? It's a social emotion. It requires someone else to feel something about you, or you to have the belief that somebody thinks something about you. So I had a belief that if people knew that I came from a wealthy family, that they wouldn't like me, they wouldn't care about me, they wouldn't trust me or whatever. And so I think that's just really interesting. And that continues to be a big part of the work that I'm doing today.
I think money's actually a really interesting point of topic, if you're okay to go there. There's a number of points that I'll just mention sort of in this preamble, right? Like, you have had a job outside of public office and public service to provide for yourself, to afford you time in public service. And we had the good fortune of having the legendary Rick Doblin on the pod. And one of the things that he had mentioned was the idea of sort of sacrificing finance or income in lieu of service, in lieu of sort of feeling good, right, from doing sort of public work. And I wonder, as somebody who just said, that having that desire for, whether it's freedom, whether it's stability, whether it's flexibility, whatever type of word you want to use around money, how do you think about the fact that public servants are in a position where a lot of those times the resources available to them are quite limited, and they have to choose at times between having multiple jobs or making real sacrifices in their family for the greater good? I'm curious, as someone who is in office, but also as an individual, how do you think about sort of the seesaw of that in your energy?
Great question. And I'm going to kind of reflect chronologically. Rick said something that I really admired, which was, I knew, paraphrasing Rick, be nice to me, I knew that I would never have to worry about paying rent or putting food in my mouth, that he didn't have the type of money where he could have whatever he wanted and do whatever he wanted, but his basic needs would be met. And so wouldn't it be a shame if he didn't leverage that privilege to do something truly audacious that would take a lifetime? I just loved that from him. I was like, yes, man, yes. And yet it's hard for me to find a similar thing. And I had a similar level of privilege, probably till I was 25. If I had grown up in a family that didn't have resources, I don't think I could have ever done what I did on that first presidential campaign. I got to go and come back from college and take an interview and get an unpaid internship. If you don't have a family that has a bedroom for you, or you have to work to feed yourself, that becomes much less likely. There's a much higher friction environment. And then I got to choose, which also, is my own work ethic and what I learned from my family, but I got to choose to work probably 16-hour days on average for that campaign, because I didn't have to have another paying job. That's something that if you don't have a family with means, you can't do. It's not just more difficult, you just can't do it. You can't. And so there's unquestionably a deep unfairness in the system about who from which financial backgrounds get pre-selected for most of the introductory roles in leadership, which require the giving of your time freely. And there's a movement to pay interns and all that, and that's great and should happen to solve that problem. In fact, I don't know what that looks like today. I hope it's significantly better than then, but there's no question that I was part of that, what I would view as unfair selection bias, for the fact that I didn't need to do those things at that time, that I stayed with my parents during the early parts of that campaign, that I had a car that, although I paid for that car, I paid for it based on a car that I sold that I didn't pay for. So I'm not sure how direct that is. That I got as a gift when I was 16, and I always had an emergency credit card so that if I, needed it, so I never had to worry about the down day. I could always just say yes to the opportunity. I'm really grateful for that now, but it's also super unfair. Now, flash forward, I was the person in a community that is extremely wealthy, where when I say I'm like one of the poor households, is not that far off, although certainly there are many that are less fortunate. But I absolutely had to work I always joked like my full-time jobs are my public service subsidy. And it's a joke, but also completely true. And I could not have done my leadership roles without having a full-time job. And it's interesting because on one hand, I get to see the flip side of that now. On one hand, it unquestionably pulled time away that could have been very well used in service. And I advocated for a minimum livable wage for elected officials for that reason, because it creates an environment where, intentionally or not, you are far more likely to get people in service who are either extremely wealthy independently or retired, and also older because they're not raising kids or families or whatever. And I think what we want is representative government where, based on choice, people from all economic strata, all sexes and genders have the opportunity to seek the community choosing them to represent them. And that's just not what we end up with. And so I was a working member of council, and had I not been, I would have been able to do a lot more of the people's work a lot more effectively. And that's just true. On the flip side of that, shifting into a phase in my life where I was entirely responsible for my own financial well-being, although recognizing I still have a parachute if everything goes to hell, because I can always get a normal job and I could move back home. Like my parents have an extra bedroom, not something a lot of people have. So I still have a lot of padding that other people don't have. That said, the risk, the forcing function of financial need is an incredible constraint that very much benefited me in terms of how to select my time. Earlier, you said doing a lot is hard. I don't think doing a lot's hard. Doing a lot is very natural to me. Doing a lot well, doing a lot in a targeted way or a effective way, that's hard for me. Just saying yes to whatever's available and working really hard, could do it all day. But actually using my time in a productive way where I'm making a selection that is most likely to yield the outcomes I want and to be really focused and intentional on the work when I'm in it, that's what's harder for me. And ironically, it is also that needing to have two jobs that is maybe the best forcing function constraint to do that. So it cuts both ways, and there's challenges on all sides of it. And I feel lucky to have experienced both and have begun the process, although much more work to do, of integrating those such that I can learn the best lessons of both and then hopefully help share what I found with others.
It's helpful for a number of reasons, right, Skippy? Like, it allows people to not just hear your story, but hear the way you think, right? And so as they listen to other conversations, there's greater clarity to where your questions are coming from, why you're positioning things, and why you're bringing on certain guests. I think it's quite important for the audience. That's why we're doing this. We've talked about a lot of who you are, but also there's so many other parts of who you are. You know, the Skippy I know as a friend is unbelievably caring and loving, but also super energetic, super bold, incredibly silly, incredibly sort of big, bold laughter, and love to laugh and love to share that laughter with others. And people have obviously seen you and heard you laugh on the show, but I don't think it probably fully encapsulates that childlike nature in yourself. Super willing to dive into things in all shapes and sizes. And so you mentioned earlier quite casually that you were championship sort of skier X. Like what that means truly for the audience is you go really high, really, really fast, really high, spin in the air, and then land on, whatever.
Not so much going high, spinny flippy, come back down. Spinny flippy zone was not really my zone of genius. I did a little spinny flippy zone, but skier cross is lining up in gates 4 to 6 wide over effectively a downhill ski race that has jumps, step up, step downs, bank turns in the middle, which I think is actually a really important distinction in terms of my predisposition, which is to say I'm best in a competitive environment. Something about being in a gate next to somebody like really turns me on. And I love speed and I love intensity, but the reason I wasn't a better slopestyle athlete, for instance, is you are alone in the gate at the top. Although you're competing, in many ways, you're competing against yourself. And I found that environment terrifying. It just really didn't work for me. So I think it's actually an interesting dispositional distinction.
I think there's something really interesting I'd love to sort of unpack on safety and risk, because your whole career and your whole path has been sort of the unconventional one. And so there's clearly a high risk tolerance, or at least, again, from the outsider looking in, high risk tolerance. I'd be curious, one, how you look at sort of safety and risk in your own life, in decision making, and how that's evolved. But also, I'd love to sort of open up the floor for you talking about your experiences in communist nations around the world as a 24-year, 25-year-old on motorbike.
In terms of risk tolerance, I recognize that I'm on the right side of normal in the standard distribution. But again, this goes back to who I compare myself to. As a competitive skier on the world tour in my early 20s, yes, I was a person that chose to strap little sticks on my feet and hurtle myself off of large rocks onto other rocks below at 60 miles an hour or more. Super fun, loved that. But the moment when I knew my career was over was sitting at the bottom of a course looking up. And so for those of you guys who aren't familiar, a big mountain competition, basically you have like a large area, patch of mountain with a gate at the top and a finish at the bottom. And then you get to go wherever you want within the confines of a fairly large area. So there may be thousands of different lines that you could ski in the course. And your job is basically pick the gnarliest, gnarly is a snow sports lingo, the gnarliest line, most challenging line you can find, ski really fast and really competently, jump off shit. And if you're able to, and this is now a requirement, it wasn't when I was doing the sport, do some tricks along the way. And your score, you have 4 different scoring points, but the first one is technicality of line. And your following scores can never be more than 3 higher than your technicality of line, which is to say, if you don't pick a 7 difficulty line, you can never get a perfect score in the others. And so you're limited by that. And I put down what was probably the best line I've ever had in competition. It was a multi-stage cliff line. I was feeling really good. I was in the top 10. And I watched another athlete who went on to become, one of the biggest film stars in skiing come down, and where my line had been, cliff, 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 cliff. If you imagine like a little waterfall in front of you making little Z's, his line just hit the top one over everything I had done, threw a backflip, landed, skied out clean. And I went, I'm never going to do that. I don't have the risk tolerance for that. I'm terrified watching it happen. I won't do that. And so that's really how I view my tolerance to risk, is like high end of normal, but not as far as the people who are really the top performers.
Do you think that your self-awareness has actually enabled you to take more risk in certain areas, but then also allow you to say, okay, this is my breaking point. So where there's an unknown, right? Like getting on the back of a motorcycle and going through Lao, right? There's so much sort of unknown in that. Do you think because in your gut that when you hit your breaking point where you see what that threshold is, you'll feel it. It allows you to go all the way up to it. Or has that been innate, right? Your skiing career was, like a lot of these things in your life, you were quite young. You were in your early 20s. And so that's a very young age to have developed that self-awareness. I'm just curious if in reflection, that self-awareness has allowed you to actually take a greater deal of risk relative to the everyday individual.
It's a really good question. And going back to the skiing metaphor, I think I did pull out some very key life lessons from that era of my life. The first one is fear is not a red light, it's a yellow light. Anytime you're going to jump off of a cliff or ski a new line or get dropped out of a helicopter, it's scary. Like your legs are shaking. All of a sudden you have to pee, but you haven't drank water in 4 hours. The same thing is true with getting on a debate stage. It's scary every time. And I think I often hear from folks, oh, you must not have fear. And this is not true. You learn that fear is an acceptable thing. It's a single input, but it's not the only input. And I've learned through experience of being afraid, jumping off the cliff, landing and skiing out, that when I do that, that is the best time in my life. It is the most fun I'll have, the most alive that I will feel, the most accomplished and confident I will. And so that translates, whether that's to a new line on skiing or to taking a new policy position or starting a new project. I know that fear is the precedent to joy or to accomplishment. And so I've learned that over time. Now, that doesn't mean when you feel fear, you just sail right through that warning. That fear is there for a reason. And so fear is there to drive you to prepare, to plan, to research. And my innate wiring is not one where I can feel the fear and then hit the 100-foot jump. That's just not how I'm built. I'm built for 5 and 15 and 20 and 25 and 30. And I've known through experience that I can get to the really big stuff, but it really is gradual for me. And so my set point is always moving, if I'm doing my life correctly in my mind, of where that threshold is. And the limit to how far I can take something is actually defined by the amount of time and experience and practice I've put into it. So what I would do in a foreign country today would maybe be less than when I had been traveling solo twice a year for a decade straight, just because I've switched to traveling with a partner and she has different needs than I do. And so I don't get to fulfill a lot of the things that I actually really most enjoy. And I get other things that I wouldn't enjoy. But when I go back to them, I can rebuild that muscle. And in the skiing analogy, what I hear from a lot of folks is, I lost my nerve as I got older. Now that I blank, I'm more scared. Oh, when I was younger, I would have done X. I don't have that at all. I feel like as a younger skier, I was the most scared. And I feel like as I get older, I become the least scared because people around me have just shifted and I've maintained pretty consistently. And I'm not going to go jump off of a 35-foot cliff tomorrow, but I'll happily jump off of a 10-foot cliff. And the reason I'm not jumping off a 35-foot cliff is because most days I'm working. But if I all of a sudden went back to skiing every day and was able to have that gradual experience, there's zero doubt in my mind that I wouldn't get back to that because physically I'm probably more able now. Like I'm in better shape than I was then. So yeah, for me, it's really about like exposure.
It's quite wonderful as I'm in my own reconnecting with my own fitness journey, college athlete who then went through my own bouts with YOLOing, or yo-yoing, excuse me. Well, I guess YOLOing too in some things too, right? That's nice. That's a little good Freudian slip. Feeling at 32 in almost as good a shape as I was as a college athlete at 22, like I think there's something also telling about the way that the mind can almost sort of snap back to those periods of time. Now, when I say that, I'm meaning like the confidence of a 22-year-old who can just throw themselves off a cliff. Like you're more rational now and you're more grounded in the steps, maybe, as he looks at me and makes fun faces. But, it's still measured enough. And so those things that you did in foreign countries when you were in your early 20s or mid 20s that you may not be able to fulfill sort of now, you said that you could go do those. I'd love to know, one, what some of those things are, because I'm sure there are some great stories to tell just based on what I know about you and how willing you are to put yourself out there into some of those experiences where the average person may find it too risky. but also to how Skippy of today would maybe approach those things differently or the same, knowing what you do about people in general and how society brings people together. What would you have changed, or would things be different?
I'm going to come back around to something that might seem quite unconventional. And I haven't tested this in practice, so I hope to. And so, yeah, warning, this is my current theory of travel and risk. I think for me, travel has always been about getting as far outside of my historical, cultural norm as possible to independently investigate and experience the breadth of the human experience. What are other ways of thinking? What are other ways of organizing societies? What are other wisdom traditions? What are other ways of eating? What are other social conventions? Like that just very much is just deeply curious to me. And that will never be satiated. Humans continue to change, although I think sadly we are homogenizing in a way that will make that type of exploration less and less interesting for a period of time. And I do think there'll be a rebound where it's sort of like fashion today, like everything is so in your face. It's like every shoe company is trying to throw glitter at you and hit you with a hammer. And I'm sure that within the next 10 years, the most expensive brands will be doing what we would think of today as very boring clothing. We're going to go back to beige and gray and simple lines, because to stand out, you'll have to be simple, because we will have reached the end of the like neural ability to be hammered in the face by design aspects. So I think there's going to be a similar point in culture where things become so homogenous and boring that people need to stand out and reclaim their history and their lineage. And we'll see that, but that's many decades out. So I think that will get less available to folks. But that's always been my frame. And so it's taken me to a lot of places where my belief going in is that they are as different from us as possible. So you mentioned going to a lot of communist countries, growing up in late 90s, early 2000s America, formative years. The Soviet bloc countries were seen as probably the most different. And so being able to go to places like Vietnam and Cuba and North Korea and Laos and China, those seem to be fertile grounds for not just differing political systems, but cultures and histories and cuisines. And so that stuff was always very interesting to me. The thing that I was going to say that might seem unconventional, and by the way I like to travel ideally is find a place, constrain myself to that country's borders for as much time as I can get off of work, either use the most local means of transit. So maybe it's the form of like a public train or a collectivo, or if available, which is my true preference, is a motorcycle, because it gives me so much latitude of movement. I can use the streets, but I can use a donkey trail. I can use dirt. If a road is washed out from a mudslide, which is very common in a lot of these places, you can get over it. If there's a traffic jam that would hold a car back for days, and that happens, you can go right through the middle split lanes. And so that you just have so much more mobility of self, and you can also get out into nature that way. Your gas mileage is better. You're not concerned about carrying extra fuel. Like, it's just a very liberating way to travel. And then to see around you, like I really forget sometimes being in a car how limited you are in what you can see in terms of your natural environment. Your connection to humans is different. When you're in a car, people want to fight you. When you're in a motorcycle, they just want to wave at you. Like, something about being able to just look at someone with your helmet and nod your head, like, it's just a different interaction. And so it opens a lot of social doors as well. And then obviously you're on a motorcycle, so as light as possible, like a backpack for a month, 2 months, and then couch surfing. Can I stay as much as is possible with locals who live there? And to me, that's the ideal travel situation. And, those are some of the elements that I haven't been able to do with a partner who understandably doesn't love the idea of showing up in a foreign country and sleeping on someone's couch they've never met. I could go back to any of those in the moment. The unconventional thing that I would do, I think, to prepare myself for that is actually a digital detox. I'm a pretty good navigator, just naturally. Like, geography makes sense to me. I have a good sense of direction. If I go to a new city in my mid-20s before smartphones, I can pretty much navigate my way around solo within a couple days. Introduce smartphones and start using Apple Maps or Google Maps if you have service. And while that muscle's there, it's atrophying. I don't know where I am because I've been following this fucking blue dot. And I think that's actually a really harmful thing for security in a foreign country, to not know where you are, to not be watching and looking where you are all the time, to have your phone, like you're not only physically looking at something else and not paying attention to your surroundings and potential threat, if that's there, or potential partnership in terms of relationship, because you're disassociated from the outside world, but you're also physically indicating to anyone who is looking for a mark that you are it. You don't belong here. You don't have people here. So you are concurrently demonstrating to the world that you are someone for whom, if they're seeking a mark, you're it, while detracting from your own ability to solve problems through the connection of others and environment. And so I think I would go back to the practice of using paper maps, not having my cell phone out, knowing where I'm going ahead of time. I would, because we have access to these things, have a digital backup plan. So I would have instructions, or I'd have 911 calls, so that if something really goes bad, I can get to the outside world in a way that I couldn't have before. If I go down and break my leg and I'm in, rural Kashmir, I don't have to wait 20 hours until a pickup truck sees me and I can wave them down to get surgery now. And so it would be really quite stupid to do that. But I would act as if I didn't have that ability until I had it. So that's maybe the unconventional. That's a thought, and we'll see how that goes. But it's also very attractive to me because I notice this in my travels now of how much connection to the place I lose through the crutch that is technology. I don't have to ask 20 people what restaurant to go to in broken English and like spark up some random conversation that takes me somewhere unexpected. I'm looking at Yelp to see what's got the best reviews. And it really does degrade the experience in a lot of ways.
It's less prevalent now, but what I love to do, I'm also quite an avid solo traveler, and I was a huge Google Earth nerd. Oh man, I would fly around everywhere in the little office in my house or my dorm room or whatever. We'd be just all over the world. And what I started to do, I would be on Google Earth and I would find specific destinations or things that stuck out in the skyline. And then when I got to a location, I would go and see those places by foot, so that in whatever condition I was in, I knew I had a reference point back to where I needed to rest my head for the night. So I very much agree, as someone, whose first gift that they remember at 3 years old was an interactive globe, going back to real maps. Maybe we don't need someone in the front seat with the MapQuest like 6 or 7 page printouts anymore. Save some trees on that. I love that. You're here in Mexico. After this, you're going to Latin America. Like, what's preventing you from maybe exploring with that a little bit, besides obviously the partner, but taking some time on your own and sort of re-immersing yourself in that Skippy?
Maybe that's the prompt I needed to do it. Really, it's just time constraints. This trip for us is our first attempt to see if we could truly work abroad for off season. We're lucky enough to live in a place where 8 months a year, the entire world is there. And I always say, one of the things that I love most about my town is it's a community that loves to see the world, and a world that loves to stop by and say hello. And 8 months a year, the world's coming to say hello. The most interesting folks from around the globe and all different places are coming through Aspen for one reason or another, whether it's a sports competition or a presidential visit or a arts festival or, food and wine festival, on and on and on. 4 months of the year, the town's basically dead. And it gives you the social permission to travel without relational or professional consequence, which is just a remarkable gift. And we are no longer in a place where our jobs are ones that we want to choose to put on hold. And so can we see the world in a different way? And in this case, it looks like spending a month in 2 places, Mexico City and Medellin, Colombia, and maintaining a full work schedule as we're doing right now. And can that work? So that exploration is yet to be seen. But what that means is if most of our day is filled by work, most of the days of the week, then the weekends are where we get to explore. And the idea of not doing that with my partner with the limited days that we have over the course of a trip is not something that felt particularly interesting to me. Now, hearing you say that, maybe I take one day and play that game, but it hasn't been in the plans for that reason.
Well, that is an interesting sort of tee up for sort of individuals that either one are looking to create more freedom or may have less flexibility in their schedule, but still want exploration and want to find ways to recharge. And I'd be curious, what are some of the things that you've learned that truly helps you recharge? Because to me, you're an Energizer bunny. You really are. And so that energy is coming somewhere. And I imagine there are people out there that may not be able to take a month or 2 months, but could take a week or 10 days and want to really sort of sink into getting the most out of themselves while still actually maybe having to work. And so I'd be curious how you, if at all, you've thought about that on this sort of exploration.
For me, I've got to get the basics first. When I arrive, I need to have Wi-Fi. My work is through the computer, through that little rectangle, and it's got to be of a sufficient speed to record. And so, there's just some environmental concerns that I need to check the box of. In this case, the first stop, home was sufficient for that. Good internet. On the second stop, it wasn't. So we're at a co-working space right now. So I had to find that space and set that schedule and reserve that room and, kind of create the physical constraints for that. As I mentioned, the number one thing for me in my self-care routine is physical exercise. So it was also finding where I was going to do that and how I was going to do that. In the case of the first stop, it was dealer's choice. There's so many options that I don't have at home that it was like, let's try a new thing every day and just see what that's like. Here, I've long been interested in CrossFit as a training modality and never done it because of the cost at home is astronomical. But here it's not. So I joined the CrossFit gym, and our Airbnb is very close to the biggest park by design. So there's runs. So it's either day I'm either going to CrossFit or I'm running. And so those were the two big check boxes for me. And that guaranteed workflow, et cetera. The thing that then was next was creating the boundaries for the exploration, which is equally hard for me because I could just work 7 days a week. And so at home, I work 6 days a week, and I really try to take Sundays off. And if my tracking device is any indicator, that works about 2 out of every 3 weekends over the course of a year. But I made a commitment early on to have full weekends, which is do my weekly review process Friday at the end of the workday. And by 6 o'clock Friday, be in exploration mode until Monday morning. And so creating the constraints and the room for that exploration. And then everything else just sort of fell in from there. That's basically as far as I've gotten.
Well, maybe we'll have to do a part 2 recap at the end of the trip, check in to see how those went. I know that in that light, there are a number of other things that you need to do today. So I want to be conscious of your time. I think it'd be maybe fun just to maybe do a little bit of like a rapid fire, couple sort of 1 word, 2 word answer or questions and answers. So first, very basically, favorite color?
Red. Do I get to editorialize? It's been my favorite color forever. I couldn't tell you why. It used to be red and white, then red and yellow, then red and black. Red always maintained. I'm sure it's my favorite color. I don't wear it. I don't really use it for much. I have no real relationship to it, but I'm just sure it's true.
Favorite food?
Fuck you, impossible.
That's the proper answer. That's the right answer.
So challenging. I love so many of them. I would say my last meal is some super spicy Southeast Asian bowl of noodles of some kind. And if I could only choose like 2 ingredients or 2 things for the rest of my life, like it has to go on forever, it would be sticky rice and then some form of like nunchuck or some kind of spicy condiment. I just do that forever.
Favorite hike or trail back home in Aspen?
If I have a full day, 4-pass loop, which is basically a diamond around the Maroon Bells, which are the most photographed mountains, so they say, in North America, in which you're traversing 4 or summiting 4 passes, which is actually the saddle, so you're not really summiting anything. That's about 32 miles. Unbelievable. Going past Snowmass Lake and just like the wildlife. It's basically the wildlife between Aspen, Colorado and Crested Butte, Colorado. If you were to, on the far side of the 4-pass loop, continue another couple miles, you end up in Crested Butte, which weirdly is 6 hours by car. If it's just a normal work day and I have an hour, probably Hunter Creek Loop.
I know that question was probably hard to answer. I'm going to ask one that I think is slightly harder for you. Picking one, what is your favorite piece of clothing or jewelry that you own? Which, for record for everyone, is quite a bit.
Just want to point out that if I only wear one piece of clothing or jewelry, it's going to be quite an experience for the listener, which I don't think is what we're trying to do here. But I'm just going to go along with what the interviewer says. The thing that popped into my mind, and with my coaching brain on, I have to take it, is Jamie and I share a piece of clothing, which is a large format sequin. So like think 1/2 to 3/4 inch diameter sequin, rainbow, and not quite a robe because it's got armholes, but the arms come down about 2 inches and then it's open in the front, and it's like a rainbow sequin in the back. Sort of looks like Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat went to Burning Man. And I think that popped into my head because I can't remember a circumstance of wearing that, be it around the house or out at Burning Man, without just having so much joy and fun.
Favorite book?
Why you do this to me? I've enjoyed it. I'm just going to do the same thing. First thing that pops into my head. There's a book called The Righteous Mind, How Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. I think I'm getting that subheading right. It's a Jonathan Haidt book. Jonathan Haidt's a remarkable writer, researcher.
You've now quoted or at least brought up at least 3, maybe 4 presidents. We'll add to the show notes. Who's your favorite president?
I think I'm going with Teddy. Yeah, it's tough. There's a few in the very top echelon, but I think I'm going with Teddy. And by the way, can we just say, now is not then. We can find something to criticize about every human in history and just wait until history judges you. So yes, Teddy and every other president have done things that within the context of our current cultural environment, we would judge, but I think we have to look at people from within the context that they were born. And I think we will, on our deathbeds, look back and wish people gave us the same grace.
Quality edition. We're going to go a little bit more in depth, but still, truncated. What inspires you?
One thing? Yes. I strongly dislike you in this moment. Yeah. Can I pick like a pluralistic response? They're just people. I'm just inspired by people every day. It's remarkable what people do with the utmost resources and none. What they create, what they build, what they believe, what they serve, what they cook, what they share. I mean, I have to be in a particularly troubling moment, and I'm in many often, to be so zoomed in on a problem with a particular person to not be in absolute awe of humanity in general and the humans within it.
What scares you?
Failure. And also, I should say, failure scares me not for the failure. It scares me for the belief of insignificance, that I will pass away from this planet without having done anything meaningful or helpful to be remembered by or proud of.
Well, in that light, then what are you most proud of?
I think I'm most proud of the trajectory I'm on. The ability to look back and recognize that, like the evolution of humanity, the evolution of me, while being far from linear or guaranteed, has trended up and to the right because of the application of work and intention that I've given whatever was needed at the time, and the conviction that that will continue to happen. And so whatever results from that will be enough.
What do you want more of in your life?
Love. So much love and cuddles. I want more cuddles. I love cuddles. They're really great. We've been talking about it a lot recently, but sometimes that comes in the form of, stop touching me. It's hot. There's no air conditioning here. It's not helpful, Jamie.
Do you feel your name is a self-fulfilling prophecy?
So glad we're away from one-word answers that I have not conformed to. I don't know. I don't believe in fate or prophecies, so strictly no, but I do think there's power in names. And I often say that a name like Skippy could have gone very badly or very well, and it went pretty well. And I was very fortunate to, in contrast to talking about being overweight at times and struggling, like to be one of the bigger, stronger, more athletic kids in my school growing up. So I think if I wasn't the person that my fellow grade school members. And I would say if I went to the public grade school prior to high school, this probably wouldn't have been true. But at my Jewish day school, I was definitely the one that the people least wanted to get hit by during football games. And I think that helped.
Yeah, my 4'11" on a good day going into my freshman year couldn't relate to that. So you failed at the one word answers, but I was expecting it. I was expecting that. One, just thank you for this opportunity. It's been a blessing, but also really beautiful to get to understand parts of your story a lot more. And there's so much more to it that we haven't even come close to touching. There's a lot of your work that we haven't even come close to touching. And I want to open the floor to you, this being your podcast, especially around the mental health component of what ELC does and what a lot of the takeaways are for the goal of this pod. And the fact that you found, whether it's something that was always there in your subconscious or that you found in reflection of your time after your time in public office, this gap between the well-being of individuals and the well-being of leaders. And I'd love for you to take some moments just to talk about some of that work, because I think it's really important that the listener has an understanding of why you care so much about this, and frankly, why it's so important as a foundation for healing our politics.
Well, I mean, I care so much because I plan to bring kids into this world, and I know people that are going to bring kids into this world, and those kids are going to have kids, and it's my responsibility as a member of the human community to leave the place better than I found it and to play a critical role in that as much as is possible to me. So the passion simply comes from the necessity to do that. It's a compulsion. Frankly, I'm pretty tool agnostic. I don't really actually care that much about what we do to achieve those collectively better ends. It's just so happened through a collection of experiences that I've reached what I really think of as the singularity moment in my life, which came around that same time as Jamie and that transition into middle-agedness, which is the moment where all of my life experiences, enjoyable, traumatic, harmful, hurtful, joyous, planned, unplanned, desired, undesired, all of a sudden became focused on a single thing. They became contributors to a single thing. And for whatever reason, I was chosen as, and when I say that, I don't mean someone out there like on a committee, this isn't some like, or some Jewish gay school, or it just so happened that the randomness of the universe and whatever role of agency and choice I had in that have landed me at the place where all of my experiences can be focused on cultivating a more healthy, mentally healthy individual and politics. And that's very clearly needed. So my zone of genius has been set, and not by me. Like, I played a role in it, but there's so much more that goes into that. And so once I had the clarity of this is where I can make a unique contribution that could be most beneficial, I'm pushing all of my effort into that. And we talked about earlier how a younger me was unable to recognize or see beyond fictitious, ego-driven leadership to true selfless leadership because I hadn't yet experienced the internal transformation that was required to see that. And we say in the coaching world that you can only take people as far as you've been. And I know I have far more distance to cover than I've covered. But I also know from my time in office during COVID that because of all the unexpected challenges I had that track back to my own childhood challenges, which maybe that's what we get into in round 2, fortunately and unintendedly prepared me to be maybe just one step ahead of many, but not all, in the public service environment in terms of caring for my own mental health, well-being, alignment, connectivity, and broader scope. And so because of that gift, I'm in a unique position to share what I've learned and experienced with others as a coach, as a founder, as an ED of a foundation, of a business. And so that's the alignment in which I feel like I've been selected, again, not by a body, but by life, to serve in this role and help others find what they need. And in the same way that I, as an individual, could only go so far, as a coach could only take people as far as they've gone, leaders can only take their community as far as they've gone. Just like me in my 20s and into, my late 20s, a lot of what I didn't know, I didn't know. We learn in contrast. We see others around us. And so part of raising awareness is just sharing experience like my own, inviting others into a fuller awareness of their experience through their own self-exploration, which won't look like or mirror mine, but hopefully is inspired by not just mine, but mostly the people we bring on the show, the other leaders who have done their work, who have been through their own journeys. And it's from a place of increasing clarity and alignment that we are best resourced as leaders to bring our communities forward. If we want our communities to be healthier and happier, we need to be healthier and happier. If we want our community to be less divided, we need to be less divided. That doesn't mean giving up your principles. It doesn't mean stopping fighting for what you believe in, but it does mean coming back into a wider, expanded understanding of humanity, that someone who disagrees with you is not the enemy. That the whole point of democracy is to disagree vigorously, but honorably, with a recognition that we can be wrong, that we're fallible, that it's through the competition of ideas that we arrive at solutions that are better than the sum of its parts, that are better than any one of us could have scripted. But that takes some strength of ego to not make it about you. And it was something that I didn't get early on. And that's okay. That was how I got to now. And that's going to be the case for everyone. But I feel really lucky to have landed at the place that for those who are interested and ready, we can cultivate a container where you can not only do your work, but come together with others. So you're not alone. You know that there are others that have your back, that are going through the same things, that are experiencing the same bullshit, the same bogging that you are. It's normal to bog, people. Normal to bog. Like a turbo engine off boost. It's normal to bog.
Very appreciative of you learning from your struggles to become who you are today. Been a pleasure not just to have this conversation, but to get to know you, to call you a partner, call you a coach, but to call you a friend. I personally am more optimistic about the world because you do what you do every day and because you are who you are. I am not political in any capacity of my life. I'd like to be more in some ways, but it's hard for me in others. And the sole reason that I wanted and agreed to be a part of this was because I believe in you. And so I just want to take a moment to thank you for sharing who you are with all of us. And I'm very, very excited for the 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old Skippy in reflection to the air quote mistakes and failures he's experiencing or looking back upon at 37. Because the wisdom that you've amassed in the short number of years you've been on this planet is only going to compound, and we're all the benefits of that. So thank you. Now, I have always wanted to say on the end of a pod, where can they find you if they want to reach out? But they know because they're here already. So I'll just sort of put the mic back over and see if there's any last words or any last sort of things you want to leave people with at the end of this conversation.
Oh, thank you, Jesse. This has been super fun. As I said, I really came in feeling anxious and scared, and which is insane. This is our podcast. We edit this fucker. There is literally no reason other than the preset patterns living in my nervous system for me to feel that way. But it's a recognition that that's what this is about. It's about not vanquishing those things that we learned over decades, but finding new ways to be with them, to honor them, to accept them, and to move through them. And I think, at least for myself, I've done that today. And I've done that with the support of others, namely you, my partner, let us in. But you are exceptionally good at what you do. I have so much admiration for how you show up in the world. And as you said yesterday, and I just want to wish or offer like a closing prayer for you, which is I hope one day in the near future you can see you the way that I see you. So thank you for that. Where you can find me, sitting in this chair. Just kidding. This came out later. I'm not here. Surprise. Healingourpolitics.com is obviously the website for here. The Leaders Handbook newsletter is the best way for you to stay up to date and get meaningful tools that are derived from this podcast that you can test and implement with your teams in the privacy of your ears or with them. electedleaderscollective.com is the website for all of our coaching work and also where our foundation is, so that if you are a community that doesn't have the resources to pay for coaching, we have private donors who make that possible, because this work belongs to everybody, regardless of party or income or budget. And we need to go where the need is greatest, not where the bank account is highest. To that end, if you want to support this work, please go to the electedleaderscollective.com and click on Foundation, where you can donate and receive a 501c3 tax deduction, helping to support not just educational efforts like this show, but direct application of services and coaching to communities in need through workshops and events, doing free coaching at conferences to those in need. We're actually about to go out, and this will timestamp this depending on when it comes out, to the National YEO convening, Young Elected Officials Organization, which I believe is the largest under 35 electeds group in certainly the country, if not the world, where, we'll show up and do what we do, give a 15-minute presentation on what's normal and how you fit into that, and then also your opportunity, and then provide free 30-minute sessions for the next 3.5 days of that. And we'll see, many tens of leaders who will get to share and experience that with us. So we would love to have your support. And then there are social media accounts for myself and for the projects. I'll be totally honest, I just can't anymore. I just can't. I'm so over it. I'm like, if you see me on social media, someone else is helping get that out there. It's very tough for me to motivate. We're currently looking for someone in a marketing role who might insist that we do more, but really the contact page through the website, info@electedleaders.com, or you can reach out to Jesse at healingourpolitics.com for the podcast in particular, is where you can get direct access to me or to the show to suggest you should be a guest, or suggest someone who should be a guest, or offer critical feedback. Direct critical feedback is how we grow and learn and would be wonderful to receive. We like attaboys, but the critical stuff is actually more helpful for us. So I think that's it. And this has been really, really fun. It's given me a new lens on this side of the mic to think about my preparation and technique. And I hope, Jesse, that you remain involved in the project. And I'd love to set a goal, if you're open to it, even if it's just you coming in for a cameo, of doing this, flip the script, for many years.
That's a yes. With that, thank you, man. It's exciting to see how this has just unfolded in such a short period of time. The quality and caliber of guests that you've been able to put together for this first season speaks very much to the character of who you are, how people respect you, and how you inspire. So with that, we can sign on off.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to put what you've heard here today into practice, sign up for our newsletter, The Leaders Handbook, where each month you'll receive just one email with a curated selection of the most useful tools and practices discussed on this podcast today and over the course of the last month, delivered in simple how-to worksheets, videos, and audio guides, so you and your teams can try and test these out in your own life and see what best serves you. And lastly, if you want to be a vector for healing our politics, if you want to do your part, take out your phone right now and share this podcast with 5 colleagues you care about. Send a simple text, drop a line, and leave the ball in their court. Because the truth is, the more those around you do their work, the better it will show up in your life, in your community, and in your world. Have a beautiful day. As leaders, we all face contentious situations. As an Aspen City Councilman, I navigated some of the most contentious STR and land use conversations in a generation. And while most were engaged in a food fight, profit versus community, Skyrun Vacation Rentals, a company built on community first values for 20 years that I know personally, helped me find a solution that created positive outcomes for everyone. If you want responsible vacation rentals in your community to strengthen the local economy, Skyrun is the vacation rental company for you. To experience their commitment to care and community up close, use code HOP15, that's Healing Our Politics 15, for 15% off a stay at one of their locations, whether for yourself or someone in your community. There's a link in the show notes below. Feel free to share it. The Healing Our Politics podcast is brought to you by the Elected Leaders Collective, the first leading and most highly recognized name in mental health, well-being, and performance coaching for elected leaders and public servants, designed specifically for you. Now, don't be fooled by the name. The Elected Leaders Collective is not just for elected leaders. It is for all public servants, staffers, volunteers, government, nonprofit, whole organizations. This is for you. If you are filled with passion for improving your community and world, but are tired, as I am, of the anger, stress, and vitriol, if you find yourself banging your head against that same wall, struggling with the incoming criticism and threats, arguing with colleagues who are supposed to be on your team, and questioning if it's even worth it anymore, then the Elected Leaders Collective programming is specifically for you. With the Elected Leaders Collective, you will learn to become a hashtag political healer, building the authentic, unshakable confidence and courage to stay true to yourself through the anger and pressure, while cultivating the open, empathetic mind to meet others with the curiosity, compassion, and kindness necessary to respond to threats, improve challenging relationships, de-escalate conflict, and bring people in your community together to solve real problems and get shit done. You'll reduce stress, anxiety, and overwhelm, and become a more effective leader while having time for your family, yourself, your health, and your wealth, sleeping well at night, and showing others they can too. Now that's leadership. Healing Our Politics listeners receive 10% off all Elected Leaders Collective services using the code hashtag political healer. Use it today and become one of the brave political leaders healing our politics. Use code hashtag political healer by going to www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today. That's www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today.